My name is Faith Mercer. I'm 34 years old. And my family had a label for everyone. My sister Jolene was the beautiful one. My brother Caleb was the genius. And me? I was the unfortunate-looking one. Nobody said it carefully. Nobody whispered it. They said it openly. Casually. Like it was weather. Like it was obvious. At last summer's family reunion, my Aunt Patricia introduced me to a woman I had never met before. She smiled, touched my shoulder lightly, then laughed and said, "This is the one we don't really talk about." I was standing right there. 34 years old. 40 relatives around us. And nobody corrected her. Not my mother. Not my sister. Not one person. But what they didn't know was that the stranger standing beside me was about to change everything. Because she wasn't some random guest. She was there for me. And within the next hour, my family's version of me would collapse publicly. But to understand why that moment mattered, you need to understand how labels work inside families. Because labels aren't descriptions. They're instructions. They tell everyone around you how much love you deserve, how visible you should be, how seriously you should be taken. And once a family gives you a role, they spend years making sure you never escape it. I was 6 the first time I understood mine. Sunday morning. June heat already pressing against the windows. My mother sat at the dining room table sewing matching dresses for the church picnic. Pink floral fabric. White ribbon. Careful stitching. Every girl in the family got one. My cousins. My sister. Even my aunt's new stepdaughter, who had joined the family 4 months earlier. Everyone except me. When I asked why, my mother didn't even look up from the sewing machine. "Jolene photographs beautifully," she said. "She needs something special." Then she handed me Jolene's old Easter dress. Yellow. Slightly faded. Brown stain near the collar. "It won't show up in pictures," my mother said. And she was right. Because I wasn't in the pictures. Not really. At the church picnic, Aunt Patricia grabbed Jolene's face with both hands dramatically. "This child is going to break hearts someday." Everyone laughed. Admired her. Then Patricia turned toward me. Tilted her head slightly. "That Mercer knows," she sighed. "Poor thing." My mother heard it. She stood 4 feet away holding lemonade. And instead of defending me, she laughed. Softly. Like Patricia had simply said something true. I stood there in the yellow dress. 6 years old. Thinking ugly was something temporary. Like dirt. Like a stain. Something you could wash off if you tried hard enough. I didn't understand yet that families can turn opinions into identities. And once they do, everything organizes itself around that story. School photos. Jolene got full portrait packages. Glossy prints. Frames for the living room. Mine? Wallet-sized only. My photos ended up in a kitchen drawer beside expired coupons and dead batteries. Birthdays worked the same way. Jolene got themed parties. Princesses. Pool rentals. Custom cakes. My birthday was 3 weeks after my brother Caleb's. So my mother combined them every year. The cake always said, "Happy birthday, Caleb." Then somewhere underneath, in smaller frosting, "And Faith." Like an afterthought squeezed in at the last second. Christmas mornings told the story too. Jolene unwrapped matching outfits. Designer boots. Coats with faux fur collars. I got books. Not because I asked for them, Because my mother decided books suited girls nobody looked at. You like reading, she'd say. Not as a question. As a category. My brother Caleb escaped first. Scholarship. Engineering program. 400 miles away. He wasn't cruel. That would have required attention. He was absent. And absence? Is its own kind of agreement? If you really want to know how a family sees you, count the photographs. Our living room had 14 framed pictures. Jolene appeared in all 14. Caleb appeared in 6. I appeared in 3. One photo. I was partially blocked behind a cousin. Another. The frame cropped half my face. The third stayed up because the balloon I held matched the sofa cushions. Not because anyone wanted me in it. My mother arranged every photo session carefully. Jolene in front. Caleb left side. Faith, move back a little. And every year. I did. One step. Then another. Until eventually, I became background decoration in my own family. At Jolene's high school graduation, my mother took 47 photos. I know because I counted later. 47. Different angles. Different poses. Different lighting. At my graduation 2 years later, my mother took one photo. I graduated with honors. Architecture degree. 2-hour ceremony. One photograph. That summer, I bought a disposable Kodak camera. The yellow kind. 27 exposures. And I started taking pictures of myself. My first apartment. My drafting desk. My internship badge. The day I passed my licensing exam. I kept them inside a shoebox beneath my bed. Because when nobody documents your existence, you learn to become your own witness. I left home at 18 with a scholarship to State University's architecture program. My mother stood in the kitchen while I packed. Architecture isn't really practical for someone like you, she said. Someone like you. She always said it that way. Like I belonged to a category she'd already decided. I didn't know then that she had once studied architecture herself. 1 year at community college before getting pregnant with Jolene. 1 year before her own dreams got packed into attic boxes. I wouldn't discover that until much later. But even without knowing, I could feel it. Every time I talked about architecture, something inside my mother hardened. My father drove me to campus. 3.5 hours. Windows down. Radio off. Dad wasn't a man who filled silence. Years of living beside my mother had taught him quietness like survival. But when he unloaded my suitcase outside the dorm, he looked at me carefully and said 6 words. Build something they can't ignore. That was it. No speech. No emotional goodbye. Just 6 words. And somehow, they carried me for the next 16 years. That first night in my dorm, I taped my photos onto the wall beside my bed. My roommate Tara looked at them curiously. Your family must really miss you, she said. I smiled politely. What I said? They're fine. What I meant? This is the first time in 18 years I can finally breathe. College changed me slowly. Not dramatically. Not in movie scenes. Quietly. Like buildings weathering into strength. I worked nights at a diner called Rosie's. Grease-stained floors. Burnt coffee smell. Sticky menus nobody fully cleaned. My shift started at 6. Ended at 2 in the morning. Then classes at 7:30. Most nights, I slept 4 hours. Sometimes less. But exhaustion felt cleaner than home ever did. Because at least exhaustion had purpose. Junior year, I landed an internship with the State Historic Preservation Office. Unpaid. Which basically meant I was paying money I didn't have to work harder than everyone else. And I loved it. Old blueprints. Crumbling courthouses. Churches nobody cared about anymore. Buildings abandoned by the world. But still standing anyway. That part mattered to me. Because I understood what it felt like to be overlooked while still carrying value. Most students chased flashy modern firms, glass towers, luxury developments. I chased forgotten places. The buildings people dismissed. The ones everyone else wanted demolished. Because somewhere deep down, I think I was trying to save myself through them. At 25, I got my first major project. A 1920s Carnegie Library in western Pennsylvania. Roof collapsed. Windows boarded. Town council voted to tear it down. I wrote a 32-page restoration proposal. Nobody expected it to work. Especially not me. But somehow, the town approved it. 6 months. Tiny budget. Impossible timeline. I slept in my car 3 nights a week. Couldn't afford the motel 40 miles away. Used reclaimed lumber. Convincing volunteers to help after school. Spent weekends sanding old wood until my hands cramped. The library reopened in October. Cold air. Golden leaves everywhere. The mayor cried during the ribbon cutting. An elderly man hugged me so hard my glasses nearly fell off. Then the town council voted unanimously to rename the reading room after me. Faith Mercer Reading Hall. 26 years old. And for the first time in my life, something carried my name because people valued me. Not because they tolerated me. I called home that night. My mother answered. I told her about the library. About the dedication. About the reading room. Silence. Then. That's nice, honey. Pause. Jolene just bought a lake house. That was the entire conversation. I sat in my apartment afterward. Phone still in my hand. Staring at the wall for a long time. Because eventually, you realize some people can only recognize value when it looks like theirs. At 28, I opened my own studio. 3 employees. Tiny office above a bakery. The smell of bread drifting through the floorboards every morning. We specialized in restoration work. Courthouses. Train depots. Churches. The bones of forgotten towns. By 32. A courthouse restoration in West Virginia won a state preservation award. Architecture journals started writing about us. Regional magazines first. Then national ones. My family never mentioned any of it. Not because they didn't know. Because they didn't ask. There's a difference. The last time I tried discussing my work at Thanksgiving, Jolene had leaned against her quartz kitchen island and asked, "So is architecture basically like flipping houses?" I said no. She shrugged. Sounds kind of similar. Then my mother changed the subject to Jolene's vacation property. That's when I stopped sharing things. Not dramatically. Just quietly. Like someone closing a window after realizing nobody outside is listening. When I was 16, I accidentally discovered why architecture made my mother so uncomfortable. Half day at school. Empty house. I went into the attic searching for encyclopedias. Instead, I found a cardboard box labeled Diane, College. Inside was a spiral sketchbook. Green cover. Worn edges. I opened it carefully. And froze. Buildings. Dozens of them. Perfect perspective lines. Floor plans. Victorian houses. Storefront elevations. Church steeples with handwritten structural notes. They weren't student doodles. They were good. Really good. The kind of drawings made by someone who understood how buildings breathe. How weight moves. How light enters rooms. I sat on the attic floor for almost an hour flipping through pages. Dust floating through sunlight. Heart pounding. Because suddenly, everything made sense. Every insult. Every dismissal. Every time architecture came up and my mother's jaw tightened slightly. She didn't hate my ambition. She hated what it reminded her of. A version of herself she abandoned. And every achievement of mine forced her to look directly at it. I placed the sketchbook back exactly where I found it. Never mentioned it. Not once. Because some discoveries explain people too well. And once you understand them, you can never unknow them again. Years passed. Projects multiplied. Recognition grew. Quietly. Steadily. My father followed everything in secret. I didn't learn that until after his stroke. Minor stroke. Left side weakened. Speech mostly intact. I drove 4 hours to the hospital immediately. My mother looked genuinely surprised when I walked into the room. "Oh," she said. "You came." Not warmth. Confusion. Like my presence disrupted the narrative somehow. I stayed 3 days helping organize paperwork while Dad recovered. Insurance files. Medication schedules. Bills. Old tax folders. That's when I found the manila folder. Bottom desk drawer. Rubber band wrapped around it carefully. Inside. Every article ever written about me. Blog printouts. Award announcements. Photos of restored buildings. Magazine interviews. 8 years worth. Some articles had absurdly long URLs printed across multiple pages. Meaning my father typed them manually into his old desktop computer. One character at a time. Slowly. Patiently. Just to read about me. I sat on the floor holding the folder for a long time. Didn't cry. Couldn't. I was too stunned by the realization that someone had been witnessing me quietly all along. Dad saw me holding the folder later that evening. He stood in the doorway silently. Embarrassed. Caught. I looked at him. "You kept all these?" He nodded once. Small. Almost apologetic. My father never defended me publicly. Never challenged my mother. Never stopped Patricia's comments. But secretly, he kept evidence. And somehow, that mattered more than I expected. Because sometimes love survives quietly. Buried beneath fear. Hidden inside desk drawers. Waiting to be discovered years later, the reunion happened in July. Humidity thick enough to feel physical. The kind of heat that makes paper plates bend in your hands. Every summer, the Mercer family gathered at my Aunt Patricia's farmhouse outside Columbus. 40 to 50 relatives. Lawn chairs. Cheap beer in coolers. Children running through sprinklers. And the same conversations repeating themselves every year like ritual. Who got divorced? Who gained weight? Who bought a new truck? And, of course, who still mattered? I almost didn't go. Honestly, I hadn't attended the last 3 reunions. Not because anyone banned me. Because invisibility becomes exhausting after a while. But my father asked this time. Not directly. Dad never asked directly. 3 weeks after his stroke. He called me. Voice slower now. Careful. Measured. "They're doing the reunion Saturday," he said. Long pause. Would be nice if you came. That was all. No pressure. No emotional speech. Just quiet hope. So I drove down Friday evening after work. 4 hours. 2 construction detours. 1 motel with stained curtains and terrible coffee. When I arrived Saturday morning, the reunion was already alive. Kids screaming near the pool. Classic rock playing too loudly from portable speakers. Aunt Patricia standing near the grill wearing oversized sunglasses like she owned the state of Ohio. Jolene spotted me first. White sundress. Perfect hair. Spray tan slightly too orange in direct sunlight. She hugged me lightly. The kind of hug designed not to wrinkle clothes. Faith. Wow, you actually came. Translation. Nobody expected you to matter enough to show up. My mother approached next. Beige capris. Clipboard in hand. Still organizing everyone else's lives at 62 years old. She kissed my cheek quickly. Then immediately asked. Did you bring potato salad? Not hello. Not how are you? Potato salad. Because in my family, utility always mattered more than presence. I handed her the bowl. She took it without looking at me. Then walked away mid-conversation. Same as always. I found Dad sitting beneath the oak tree near the edge of the property. Paper plate balanced on his knee. Watching people quietly. His left hand still trembled slightly from the stroke. But when he saw me, his face softened immediately. There she is, he said. Simple sentence. But genuine. I sat beside him. And for 20 peaceful minutes, we just watched the chaos together. That was our relationship. Shared observation. Quiet companionship. No performance required. Then Patricia arrived. Of course she did. People like Patricia can sense peaceful moments from miles away. She carried a wine cooler and the energy of someone always preparing for an audience. Well, look who decided to join society, she announced loudly. Several relatives laughed automatically. Not because it was funny. Because families develop reflexes. Patricia looked me over slowly. Still doing that thing where her eyes paused too long on my nose. My jaw. The parts of me they always discussed openly. Then she smiled toward a woman standing nearby. A stranger. Tall. Silver-streaked dark hair. Navy linen suit despite the heat. Elegant in the kind of effortless way money creates quietly. Patricia placed one dramatic hand on my shoulder. This, she announced brightly, is the one we don't really talk about. Laughter again. Small this time. Uncomfortable. Because even for Patricia, that crossed slightly further than usual. I felt the familiar reaction immediately. The old one. Heat rising up my neck. Body preparing itself for humiliation before my brain could catch up. 34 years old? And my nervous system still remembered childhood perfectly. But before I could respond, the stranger spoke. No, she said calmly. Actually, she's exactly who I came to see. Everything stopped. Not dramatically. Subtly. Like a room inhaling all at once. Patricia laughed uncertainly. Oh. The woman stepped toward me slowly. Then extended her hand. Faith Mercer? Her voice carried the kind of confidence that doesn't need volume. I nodded carefully. Yes. She smiled. I'm Eleanor Vance. The name hit immediately. Not because I knew her personally. Because everyone in architecture knew that name. Eleanor Vance. Founder of Vance Restoration Group. One of the largest preservation firms in the Midwest. Historic theaters. Federal courthouses. University campuses. Multi-million-dollar projects. The kind of architect people study in graduate school. My stomach dropped slightly. Because suddenly, nothing about this moment made sense. Patricia blinked twice. Completely lost. You know each other? My mother asked carefully. Eleanor looked at me warmly. Not yet, she said. But I've spent the last 3 years trying to find her. Silence. Heavy now. Confused. Patricia laughed again nervously. Well, Faith never mentioned knowing famous people. Eleanor tilted her head slightly. That's interesting. Then she looked directly at Patricia. Because your niece is considered one of the most gifted restoration architects in the country under 40. Nobody moved. Not Jolene. Not my mother. Not Patricia. Even the music near the pool suddenly felt too far away. Eleanor continued calmly. Her Carnegie Library restoration is taught in preservation seminars. Her courthouse work in West Virginia won national recognition last year. She's currently on the shortlist for the Cincinnati Union Terminal preservation bid. My mother stared at me like I'd started speaking another language. Because to my family, my career had always existed somewhere between hobby and background noise. Something vague. Something unimportant. Patricia recovered first. Well, goodness, she laughed too loudly. Faith never talks about herself. That part almost made me smile. Because the truth was, I tried. For years. They just never listened. Eleanor reached into her leather portfolio. Then pulled out a magazine. Architecture and Preservation Quarterly. Fall edition. My face on the cover. Hard hat. Rolled blueprints under one arm. Headline across the top. The Woman Saving America's Forgotten Buildings. Patricia's mouth literally opened. Actually opened. Like her body forgot how to react. Eleanor handed the magazine to my mother. I assumed your family already knew, she said gently. My mother stared at the cover. Hands trembling slightly. Not emotional trembling. Shock. Pure shock. Because for the first time in her life, she was being introduced to her own daughter by strangers. And strangers valued me far more than she ever had. Dad looked at the magazine quietly. Then at me. And slowly. He smiled. Proud. Openly proud. For maybe the first time in public. And something about that moment hurt almost as much as it healed. Because part of me still wondered what my life might have looked like. If somebody had done that sooner, nobody spoke for several seconds. Not because they were being polite. Because shock rearranges rooms. And suddenly, my family didn't know where to place me anymore. The old category no longer worked. The unfortunate-looking one. The background daughter. The extra chair at the table. All of it started collapsing publicly. Right there beside Aunt Patricia's grill. My mother kept staring at the magazine cover. Like if she looked long enough, she might discover it belonged to someone else. Eleanor sat beside me calmly. Completely unaware. Or maybe fully aware. That she had detonated 30 years of family mythology in under 2 minutes. Patricia recovered first. People like Patricia always do. Well, she laughed loudly. Would you look at that? Our Faith is famous. Our Faith. Interesting how ownership suddenly appears. The moment pride becomes profitable. Eleanor glanced at her politely. Then said something that froze the entire table again. She almost didn't get the Cincinnati bid because another firm assumed she lacked leadership presence. Pause. They changed their minds after meeting her. Patricia shifted uncomfortably. Because everyone there understood exactly what leadership presence meant. Pretty enough. Polished enough. Acceptable enough. The same silent measurements I had lived under my entire life. My mother finally looked up from the magazine. You never told us any of this. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because the sentence was so deeply unfair it became absurd. I tried, I said quietly. The table went still. Again. Because truth sounds different when spoken calmly. No anger. No accusation. Just fact. I told you about the library restoration. You changed the subject to Jolene's lake house. I told you about the preservation award. You asked if architecture was like flipping houses. Jolene's face flushed immediately. Not guilt. Embarrassment. Different things. I didn't mean it like that, she muttered. No, I replied softly. You just never thought it mattered. That landed harder. Because everyone there knew it was true. Not just Jolene. All of them. Years of dismissal suddenly visible all at once. Like someone finally turning on lights inside a dirty room. My father kept looking at the magazine cover. Then at me. Then back again. Like he was trying to reconcile two versions of the same daughter. The invisible child. And the woman strangers respected enough to place on national covers. Eleanor spoke again carefully. Actually, Faith's work is the reason I'm here. Everyone looked at her immediately. I've been trying to recruit her for almost 3 years. My mother blinked rapidly. Recruit? Eleanor nodded. Our Chicago division is expanding. Then she turned toward me fully. We're offering partnership. Silence. Complete. Even the kids near the sprinkler suddenly sounded far away. Partnership. Not a job. Ownership. Influence. Recognition at the highest level of my profession. I hadn't told anyone yet because negotiations weren't finalized. Not even my father. Especially not my mother. And suddenly, the family who spent decades acting like I barely existed was learning my entire life from a stranger in a navy linen suit. My mother sat down slowly. Like her knees stopped trusting her. You're moving to Chicago? There it was. Not pride. Not congratulations. Fear. Because suddenly, I wasn't the daughter standing quietly in the background anymore. I was someone leaving permanently beyond their reach. Probably, I answered honestly. Patricia forced another laugh. Well, goodness, who would have thought? Dad answered before I could. I did. Everybody turned toward him. Including me. My father rarely contradicted anyone publicly. Especially Patricia. But now. His voice stayed steady. I always knew she'd build something important. The sentence hit me harder than I expected. Because all my life, love from my father existed in fragments. Quiet things. Folders hidden in desk drawers. 6-word encouragements beside dorm parking lots. Never this. Never public. Never clear. My mother stared at him. Stunned. Like she was realizing maybe she hadn't fully understood him either. Dad looked at me carefully. Then added softly. They just stopped looking too soon. Nobody breathed. Because suddenly, everything became visible. Not just what they said about me. What they failed to see. For decades. My mother lowered the magazine slowly onto the table. And for the first time in my life, she looked at me without comparison. Without adjustment. Without measuring me against Jolene. Just looked. Long enough to actually see me. Then quietly. Almost too quietly. She asked. When did this happen? I knew what she meant. Not the career. Not the awards. When did I become someone she no longer recognized? I thought about answering 100 different ways. The architecture school scholarship. The library restoration. The courthouse award. The years alone. But the real answer was simpler. It happened when I stopped waiting for this family to tell me I mattered. That sentence changed the air completely. Because people like my mother believe identity comes from family approval. And suddenly, I was standing there as proof that it doesn't. Jolene crossed her arms tightly. Defensive posture. Childhood instinct. So what, now we're terrible people? Interesting question. Because nobody had actually said that. Not out loud. I looked at her carefully. You weren't terrible, I said. You were comfortable. Silence. Comfortable believing one version of me because it made everyone else feel better. Even Patricia looked away at that. Because deep down, every single person at that reunion knew they participated. Some actively. Some passively. But participation doesn't require cruelty. Only silence. My mother suddenly stood up. Abruptly. Then disappeared into the house without a word. Nobody moved. A few relatives pretended to focus on paper plates and lemonade. Because families panic when truth becomes public. 5 minutes later. Mom returned carrying something long and flat wrapped in yellow tissue paper. She stopped directly in front of me. Hands trembling slightly. Then held it out. I think this belongs to you. I unwrapped it carefully. And froze. The green spiral sketchbook. Her architecture sketches. The one from the attic. The one she never knew I found. My throat tightened immediately. Because suddenly, I understood. This wasn't random. This was surrender. My mother looked at the ground when she spoke. I quit after Jolene was born, she whispered. I told myself it didn't matter. Her voice cracked slightly. But every time you succeeded. Pause. It reminded me of the life I didn't choose. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Because pain sounds different when it finally stops hiding. Tears filled her eyes slowly. Not dramatic tears. Exhausted ones. I thought if I made you smaller, I wouldn't feel so disappointed in myself. There it was. The truth underneath 30 years of criticism. It was never really about my face. Or my body. Or my worth. It was grief. Misplaced. Inherited. Projected onto the easiest target. Me. I looked down at the sketchbook. Perfect pencil lines faded with time. Dreams pressed between paper pages for 3 decades. Then I looked back at my mother. And for the first time in my life, I saw her clearly too. Not as a villain. As someone who abandoned herself so completely. She couldn't tolerate watching someone else become whole. That realization didn't erase anything. But it changed the shape of it. Dad stood slowly beside me. His hand resting lightly against my shoulder. Proud. Steady. Present. And suddenly, for the first time ever, I wasn't standing behind the family photo anymore. I was finally centered inside it. Not because they gave me permission. Because I stopped believing I needed it.